Welcome to this episode of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on global politics on the KJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer, as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in The World According to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Thank you. Thank you.
So again, several big topics, Irina, and the biggest one that is for us is Prime Minister Modi's visit to the U.S. How do you look at it from that point of view? Was it a friendly meeting? What is it, only a diplomatic meeting? How should one look at it? How do you look at it?
Sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question? It froze for a second on my end.
Yeah, the first part is how do you look at this whole meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump?
Oh, it was. I think it went very very well. I think there was a lot of excitement, and I think even the issues that were contentious, such as tariffs, actually were likely to be resolved in in an amicable way. Prime Minister Modi came in already willing to negotiate the lowering of certain tariffs, and Trump, although he threatened to impose reciprocal tariffs on various countries, immediately actually only authorized he only authorized a memo, essentially a study of these potential effects of these tariffs for the duration of 6 months, which is basically a window of negotiations between the different countries, and I think these talks are going to be ongoing for a while. Regarding other issues, India succeeded on a number of fronts, including securing the extradition of a terrorist involved in a major attack in India, and also extending future cooperation with the United States on the countering terrorism and other security-related cooperation issues. There were also a number of major agreements signed, including the Meta agreement regarding underwater internet cable connectivity in the Indian Ocean, and other economic projects um, that are likely to supplement and enhance the planned IMEC corridor by bringing in additional actors such as Italy and expanding the scope of this framework. And
Absolutely.
of course, President Trump surprised everyone by offering the sale of F-35 to India, which, while it may be complicated due to cost and logistical reasons, it signals a very important shift towards a greater trust in the relationship. And of course, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for enhanced trade to the tune of $500 billion by 2030, and increased defense American defense sales, an agreement for co-production of certain defense-related items, and U.S. aims to become India's top oil provider as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Irina, let's look at it much more closely. First, in terms of the extradition of, the Havur Rana. When will that happen?
Well, the issue is in process. President Trump authorized it, and he basically told his staff to process it as soon as possible, which presumably should not take that long, especially considering that the Supreme Court also has already authorized it, and it was only being held up by the previous administration. So as soon as the staff is in place to process this order, I think it will be done. Prime Minister Modi, when he came for the visit, his first meeting was with the newly appointed DNI, who was Tulsi Gabbard, who was confirmed the same day. They have a very amicable relationship, and I think she listened carefully, and I think I don't see any holdups other than simply the processing of this issue and whether the staff is in place to actually make it happen. That I'm not sure about, because uh, the administration has been trying to do many things at the same time, but that means also that a lot of hires have been frozen, and there's been a general federal hiring freeze, so the appointments have also slowed down.
Absolutely. So was it how did it look? Did it look like meeting of old friends, or did it look like pure minister, top people from two countries, or did it look like, US is looking at India as a long-term formidable partner?
It was a very warm meeting, both in optics and in substance. The body language was very warm. Trump clearly indicated that there would be a continuity from not from his first term, and in opportunity to even enhance that relationship beyond what happened in his first term. And he also mentioned the revived and revitalized Quad, which means that he is not canceling the initiative of his predecessor, but is planning to build on it and possibly give it more teeth. There were very warm words exchanged, and the meetings were also very positive. So it looks like even though Trump is fixated on tariffs and getting what he wants to get a great deal out of it. In terms of actual relations, I think the rapport was very positive, and I think everything that was done enhanced the idea that uh, U.S. and India are very much heading in the direction of a very comprehensive defense and security arrangement and partnership, and also very significant economic bridge building as well.
Absolutely. So who was this visit most beneficial for, India or the US?
Well, I think from the US side, it was a very positive side that this was one of the first meetings with leaders that Trump had, and it sent a signal that in general and beyond the specifics of this particular visit, India is going to be a very important partner for the entirety of the term, and it's going to be one of the key relationships. So that for India, it's a huge win, and for the US, and I think in terms of the many projects that we discussed, I think it was a very positive development, and I think India can expect a lot of support, a lot of investments. um Quite frankly, I think even the tariff thing is in some ways positive. I think as India grows and as its trade relationship with the US grows and expands into more and more sophisticated trade items such as high tech and defense equipment, it will make more sense to lower taxes on both sides, and to make this sort of trade affordable, and to liberalize economy, which is building on Prime Minister Modi's other economic successes. So I think even that is, rather than being a point of contention, I would say that it's more of a point of evolution and a natural development of the relationship based on um, common interests, common needs, and just uh, natural trends as these relations deepen and develop. Of course, the size of these investments is huge, and also the fact that the US and India are now both on the same side, that there was no mention of these Khalistani terrorists, certainly no meetings of them with them by the White House prior to the meeting. I think all of that sends a very positive sign that India got what it needed for its national security interests out of this meeting, and will probably um, enhance its interests and concerns by deepening that security relations with the US, and possibly um, sending a message across to other parties by through that meeting. And for the US too, I think the fact that they're seeing India as more willing to buy defense equipment, defense technology from the US is a huge win, because this is an issue that the two countries have been struggling with for some time. In his first term, that was one of the main of points of contention between Trump, who wanted India to buy all that equipment at full price. At the time, it was very costly. Now we are seeing improvements in both sides. So I think it's actually a big win for the US as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Irina, if this was so good, why was this whole need of bringing about funds for India? Not a big amount, but why did what was the need? What is it that Trump wanted by mentioning about that?
About
About the funds.
Yes, well, frankly, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it underscores that he is actually committed to this particular relationship and he's planning on following through. Yes, he wants to send a signal that he's the stronger winning side and that he expects some sort of a return on the US investment, but that is natural in business relationships. Of course, people who are investing money into something are expecting that investment will pan out to their benefit, and that's not a bad bad necessarily a bad sign. I do think that this is relationship is not just transactional, as it happens to be with many of Trump's other relations, simply because I'm observing of a continuity on many fronts, even from Biden administration's developments with India, and Trump is not backing down on them or canceling them, which underscores the seriousness of U.S. investment into this intention and the fact that it's an institutional relationship and not just a relationship between two leaders or Trump's decision to score a few big diplomatic wins at a certain point in time.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. And mentioning of funds, also the funds, the voter turnout fund, that is a very small amount, whatever amount it is. What was the need of creating unnecessary difficulty for the Indian Prime Minister? Because it's leading to unnecessary debate in India.
I personally, if I were someone living in India, I would not necessarily focus on that because Trump's style is that he wants to come out he looking like he's won something even if there's nothing much to win. He just the way he is, even when he knows that actually there is a certain level of parity between the countries and actually wants it that way. It is his absolute habit to try to come across to his base in the United States that he's won something and that somebody owes him and he's got one over somebody, or that he has the leverage and that that he's going to exercise and get something back later. That's just how he operates. But I actually think that the positive outcomes of and the totality was so overwhelming that these little things completely fade by comparison and should be attributed exclusively to internal domestic messaging and nothing more than that.
Absolutely, and Trump also added that Prime Minister Modi is a tougher, perhaps, negotiator than he is. Was this a compliment, or was this just way of getting much more from India?
I do think it was a very positive tone from Trump. He sometimes can get sarcastic and caustic with his counterparts, but in this case,
Yes,
while I do think he was handling a lot of it with humor, I genuinely got a very positive vibe, and I think he respects that. I think he respects tough negotiators, and I think his personal rapport with Prime Minister Modi has always been very positive, and I think because of that, even if it's something that he may have resented in somebody else, in this particular instance, I felt that it was a very positive thing, and he didn't mind, and I didn't feel like there was any tension at all during any part of these discussions, even including on contentious issues like tariffs.
absolutely, absolutely. And let's throw some light on Elon Musk. How much imprint did he have on these meetings at all? Like he is very active on the international arena. What about Trump Modi meeting? He met Prime Minister Modi, but was his imprint also in any of the way things were happening, or this one he left out between the two big leaders?
I felt that in this particular case, Musk actually limited himself to his own personal business issues and actually stayed out of the general dynamic. I did not think he had anything to do with the Tulsi Gabbard meeting, and I think the Trump meeting very much was a continuity of his first term. In some ways, it was very different from Trump's um, renewed dynamics with other countries. I think in this case, you could tell that it was very much a Trump thing and Trump a continuity from his prior meetings and discussions, simply because that relationship has already been ingrained and has been so positive. It may benefit Musk, but I didn't feel like Musk had much to add to it, and he knew it because Musk's relationship with Trump is fairly new, comparatively speaking, and it's not something that he personally brought to the table. It's something that he's trying to benefit from, and not the other way around. So I think it was smart of him to limit it to his business interests, and not really to try to engage too much. Otherwise, I think it worked out best that way. And I think, frankly, had he tried to handle it in any other ways, it may have actually been counterproductive.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. One more thing about this whole meetings was that who do you think must have been watching these meetings between these two big leaders from outside the world? Is it China? Is it Pakistan? Is it the BRICS nation? How do you see it?
I think everybody was watching it because you have a United States, superpower. India is becoming very much a superpower, and there is a lot of interested parties. Other Quad members certainly were watching that. Members of I2U2 and all the other uh, defense and economic alliances that US is part of, NATO members were watching that because there's going to be also enhanced collaboration on certain issues. And of course, other BRICS countries were watching it, and as well as the entire Middle East, because of the agreement, the IMEC related agreement that will affect the Middle East as well. So much of this relationship is going to be taking on global dimensions. It's not just the bilateral India-US relations. Although, of course, they are important. China does watch that very closely, but a lot of it is truly international, and I think a lot of countries also will, with an interest in the extremism, counter-terrorism arena, will also benefit from this sort of collaboration. I think they're looking to latch onto it in some ways. And certainly, of course, Pakistan was watching it probably not with a very positive feeling, but it is what it is.
Absolutely, it is what it is. This needs to be, we have to watch it out how it all plays. Do you think Trump is making an extra effort to wean India a wee bit from the BRICS sort of, thing?
Frankly, if I mean, Trump sent a financial message, an economic threat to BRICS, but I don't think that BRICS is as huge a threat as some other blocks and organizations that have more teeth, greater trust, and greater interoperability. Edge is one of those groups that has sort of teeth and can be a potential rival to US interests. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a defense bloc that can be influential. BRICS, as such, is more of a mechanism for circumventing certain types of sanctions and exchanging technology between the member states. But the fact that Saudi Arabia has distanced itself from that, and it's not clear if it ever was really a full member, is very telling that this is a very tentative alliance. It's very much being currently pushed by Russia as an anti-American, anti-Western message, and I think the other ones are just trying to get what they can in terms of trade and technology and economic things. But I don't get the sense that a lot of these countries have much in common otherwise, and because there are such vast economic, political, and military differences among them, I don't see that they would present such a major threat to Trump or to the US.
Absolutely, absolutely successful meeting it was. Now let's move on to the to Trump's position on Gaza takeover. Trump looks like to be a very hardcore negotiator. He changes his position on Gaza. Is he showing another of his you know greatness in that sense that he can change positions?
Well, I mean, the Gaza proposal was a huge wrench that, you know, a huge hot potato that, uh, uh, a Molotov cocktail that Trump just threw into the international arena. In fact, I am almost tempted to say he just wanted to see what happens without really caring how it will necessarily end. And I think he's less married to the mechanics of the in between than an opportunity to try to get some sort of a commercial angle. And you're seeing that there's a lot of contradiction in the rhetoric of his officials. Some are saying that this is just about motivating the Arab states to come up with their solutions. Some are saying that Gaza is virtually uninhabitable and they want to ensure Israel's security. Some are saying that all of this is actually just an invitation to discuss potential investment opportunities, no matter how anybody gets there, and the outcome is more about real estate and investment than about displacing anybody or geopolitics or anything else. So to me, the signal is that Jared Kushner and a lot of the real estate people around Trump got caught onto this idea, and while they're not necessarily thinking through the security and the geopolitical or the legal repercussions of the suggestions, they're just thinking about an add-on from the Abraham Accords and a way of kind of creating this economic reconstruction project that they can get money off, especially if Saudis get involved. That's my sense, to be honest.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you think he will change his position on Greenland, on Canada, on Panama Canal?
So the one common thread in all of these things is, the presence of China and, of course, also the minerals. In Canada and Greenland are both rich in minerals. I think Trump wants to ensure deals. Are those deals necessarily for U.S. benefit or for his own personal businesses? That sometimes gets to be very difficult to say, but I have a feeling that if something sufficiently interesting were offered, he would reconsider a lot of his rhetoric, and I don't think he has any serious intention at all of invading any of those places. But I do think that his tensions with their allies are actually backfiring in many ways. I think we do not want to see a trade war with the entire EU. We already have some tensions over tariffs in some areas, but the key is to push for more free trade, not for more tariffs by both sides. I think Trump was hoping to that some of his threats would weaken Trudeau, but actually it's backfiring and actually strengthening the Liberal Party, even though the Conservatives are still on par, but they could be probably further in the lead if not for Trump's intervention. And with Panama, we're seeing extremely mixed results. It is a positive sign that Panama officially decided not to renew the BRA construction, but it's not doing anything to unravel any prior projects. And now the leader, the government also said that future conversations will not be discussing Chinese military or other presence in the area, which is definitely not a good sign. It's a sign that there's going to be a populist wave in Panama, and it could also backfire against the U.S.
Absolutely. From here, let's look at Ukraine. Do you think Trump will look change positions again on Ukraine? Go back to the Biden times, because or is Ukraine now the defense of Ukraine is now Ukraine's responsibility and Europe's responsibility? How do you see that?
Well, Congress has signaled they will not be approving any new additional aid to Ukraine, but it also means that they may not be approving any actual sales because Ukraine is now said that they're willing to buy all of this equipment, and frankly, they don't want giveaways of old garbage, broken down planes. They want to buy things that will give them quantifiable advantage against the Russian forces. And the European Union and other European countries are willing to give very substantial packages to help them acquire top of the line equipment fairly quickly. By the way, the question is, is Trump going to be so entrenched in his positions that he, for the sake of trying to chase a Nobel Peace Prize or some other deal, is going to let this opportunity slide and reject even motions to sell weapons to Ukraine, while trying to appease Russia and shut down the war? Because Russia's offers are fairly vague. They're offering minerals in Russia, but also in occupied territories in Ukraine. And Ukraine was actually offering a far better deal to the US than what Trump ended up agreeing to. And Trump could have gotten a very solid percentage of Ukrainian minerals in exchange for security guarantees, but because he made completely unreasonable demands, the deal that is on the table with Ukraine now is just a vague memorandum of understanding about potential exploration of minerals jointly, and does not get US anything concrete and specific. There's no serious quid pro quo there. So what we're seeing is that Trump appears to be so entrenched by this idea of backing Russia's position and trying to end the war by putting pressure on Ukraine, that he may be missing out on some major economic and political opportunities that would benefit the US. And selling weapons to Ukraine definitely benefits the US. There's absolutely no question about it. And right now, I'm seeing Russian propaganda points and going virtually unchallenged because Trump surrounded himself by people who either agree with that, or even if they do not, they're so afraid of losing their position of influence that they are afraid of speaking up and challenging and just saying this is nonsensical, this does not get us anywhere. And now even countries that are even have fairly good relations with Russia are afraid of dealing with us because we are not keeping by our commitments, and we are seen as as not exercising our leverage when it's needed, even in our own interest. So this is the major question here. And from my understanding, Trump has a couple of gatekeepers who are very pro-Russian, and Tucker Carlson is one of them. And essentially, because Trump is isolated from any advice that would challenge these positions, he is not likely to change his mind quickly unless there's very significant pressure from the European Union and other countries. But even European leaders have been fairly isolated from Trump. Macron was the first European leader to travel to the White House, and Trump has not gone physically to meet with anyone in Europe as of yet. So we are facing a situation where he's very much surrounded by this domestic bubble, which makes it very hard for him to change positions.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. Let's look at it from a couple of points. Firstly, why did this whole issue of solving this Ukraine Russia war turn so bitter? Why did Trump have to call Zelensky a dictator? Why did Musk have to post those pictures that led to a bit of a bitterness? The world is trying to understand, does this happen generally in diplomacy this way? That could have happened. A lot of things could have happened backdoors.
Well, frankly, this is not the most effective way of positioning yourself as a neutral mediator and succeeding in getting two parties to talk to each other. Right now, it doesn't seem like the aim is to get Russia and Ukraine talking directly. I think the aim for the US is to get whatever economic deals they want out of Russia and maybe pressure Ukraine into conceding, which is not very likely. Given the fact that Zelensky did not give in during the first days of the war, when it seemed that he was about to get assassinated, it's much less likely now that he would listen to this kind of pressure, because Europeans are now becoming more committed, and Ukraine is also now producing much more of its own weapons. And even Turkey is willing to sell those weapons for out of spite for Russia and also commercial interest, and because it has a bad economy.
Right,
Given all
right, Irina.
these factors, Ukraine is actually in a much stronger position than 3 years ago, and I think people around Trump are making a huge mistake in not making that calculation. Not only because they're missing out on opportunities, but because they themselves come out looking very uninformed and naive, and some of the leverage they're trying to exercise against Ukraine is not working because they don't have the basic data. For instance, there's been a pressure, an attempt to force Zelensky into signing an unfavorable, ridiculous version of the minerals deal that would force him to pay off $500 billion in minerals to U.S. in exchange for past assistance. And one of the pieces of leverage that was reportedly exercised not by Elon Musk but by somebody else in the administration was this threat to remove Starlink from the country. The problem being, none of the service is actually free. Up until this point, US taxpayers were paying for them, but now Ukraine is paying for them, and other countries as well. Poland announced it's moving 5,000 Starlinks to Ukraine now, so presumably they're going to pay for it. Or or they're going to pay for it jointly, but it's not going to be the US. Um, Now it turns out that European Union finally developed their own satellite communication system called Iris, which presumably can be deployed to Ukraine, and so that gives Zelensky a choice of systems that he can use. So that's not much of a leverage. If Zelensky can simply go to another system, you can't really force him with that sort of thing. The fact that these guys came into the meeting unprepared and not knowing that there are other options on the market just tells me that they're not very serious about how they're treating it, and they're seriously being outplayed by superior diplomats from other countries.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. One more point was this rare earth from Ukraine. Almost sounds from this part of the world that it's all about rare earth. Is the US image getting any benefit out of this whole talk about rare earth and this whole bringing peace in this Ukraine and Russia war? How does it look? What is this rare earth all about? Do you think diplomacy again is done by this arm twisting? It looks like arm twisting here.
Well, I'll tell you something that most people are not aware of, even though it is public information. Well, Trump is trying to force these economic concessions over minerals, presumably vis-a-vis China. Chinese contractors are actually all over Ukraine, and they're all over the occupied territories in Ukraine, making deals on the ground already. So whatever Trump thinks he's going to get, China is already getting it. So instead of down and trying to oust Russia and China from Ukraine, Trump is actually fighting over scraps while these countries are maximizing their leverage. I think it's a bit silly, and this is not how you do business, even if your ultimate goal is your own economic interests and not, geopolitical outcome of some sort, be it peace or victory or whatever else. I mean, Trump is not doing his own position any favors because he is actually losing ground to his enemies that he's presumably trying to fight here. So that signals that he's less concerned about US economic interests than potential private deals that he and his cronies could get out of this, which is extremely disturbing, to put it mildly.
Absolutely, absolutely. With Europe getting much more involved in Ukraine now, how do you think the future of this whole peace talks will go? Because do you think now there will be more players? Zelensky will have a much more stronger backing from Europe. Much more European players will come into this whole talks whenever, whatever way it happens.
I think it's backfiring tremendously because Europeans are very concerned about their own security, and they understand that if Russia entrenches itself in Ukraine, it can, and if Trump weakens NATO or does not play the part that US has traditionally played, Russia will be free to attract small Baltic countries and from there make its way into Europe through Moldova, through the Baltic states, through Romania potentially. In Romania, it's trying to force a Russian stooge into power through abuse of the political system. He was just caught earlier today with 10 million uh, euros or whatever literally under the table, locked in his basement under the boards. So we are seeing that Russia is aggressively expanding its influence, and AFD, which is very much Russia backed, has doubled its seats in Germany, even though they lost the election. We are seeing that there was a series of migrant based terrorist attacks in Germany and nearby countries right before the elections. Presumably, that was an organized campaign to try to get more people to buy into the AFD promises and threats and so forth. So, Russia is very aggressive on many fronts and not just in Ukraine. You Europeans understand that, but Zelensky has things to offer beyond just asking for help, and we are seeing that even South Africa, which is very pro-Russian, pro-Iranian, definitely not with the West, they've invited Zelensky quite surprisingly for a conversation, and Zelensky is slated to go to Saudi Arabia, and the fact that the Crown Prince during these talks between Russians and Americans there suggested that Ukraine should be included. That's huge. That means that the current situation is not seen as neutral even by some of the Saudi leaders. That is not a plus for Trump or for Putin for that matter.
Absolutely, absolutely. One more question on this is that the world order that came out after the Second World War, with much more coordination between Europe and US in terms of security, do you think that this untangling has begun with this whole thing going on? That Europe will be much more different than what with the US than what it was before Trump?
Well, there are certainly waves of isolationism in Europe, and some of those isolationist elements are playing to Russia, and some of them are playing to a pro-unified, strong European position. It's not clear yet which one will win out, but it does appear that there is a trend in a more positive direction by the Europeans who do want to be more independent of the US and who do see Russia and China as threats to their national security value system and way of life. Trump's transactionalism does not have much to offer because if you fail in your transactions, then you fail completely. And if you don't have a system of alliances to get you through when you do fail in these occasional transactions, you are left with nothing. So this is not a long-term framework that will survive past, a few transactions if you're not seen as committed either to your transactions or to your alliances. You will end up isolated and not by choice. Um, and that's I think Europe is going to be looking for new alliances against Russia, against China. Who that will be? They may be appealing more to try to bridge relations with the Middle Eastern countries, to work closer with Japan and South Korea. For instance, they may even try to strengthen their relations with India in certain particular ways, just for the sake of economic gain. Gain, but I do think that U.S. will be losing out if they're seen as a weak link in the security arena. That is not something anybody ever wants to have.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. So, one interesting thing is why are Chinese contractors in Ukraine? They are expanding their reach in Ukraine, if I understand. Help us understand China in Ukraine.
Well, China is cooperating with Russia in occupied territories. Prior to all of this, China was also doing business with Ukraine, bidding for reconstruction contracts and so forth. And they've tried to limit the engagement with Russia to some extent, but increasingly they're seen as plainly pro Russian. And I think even Ukraine government that was desperate for any sort of economic engagement and that was trying to break Russia and China apart, even they realized that it's sort of a lost cause. Yes, you can exploit certain intelligence and defense tensions between the two countries, but are they ultimately oriented against the West? That's absolutely true. So I do think that Ukraine is now rethinking its approach of allowing China to bid for reconstruction in the future, but in the meantime, China is still already has significant presence, and it's not easy to get rid of them there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lots to understand about, but looks like. So, how does this peace deal move forward? The peace deal in Saudi Arabia, that will be the next stage of talks. You know,
Well, Russia and US both rejected the Crown Prince's suggestion of including Ukraine in the next stage, so it looks like Russia and US will continue to pursue one sided deliberations, and at some point, the Trump Putin summit may happen in Riyadh. Rubio and some others were saying that some of it could happen as early as end of this week, depending on how things went with Ukraine, and they could be signing a ceasefire. But Zelensky didn't see how it could happen, and it took them up until the middle of the week just to agree on a very symbolic, very minor MOU concerning the minerals that actually does not really add anything.
absolutely.
So I'm very skeptical that any direct conversations between Russia and Ukraine will be happening anytime soon at this rate. And even trilateral talks are not very likely in the near future. I think a lot will happen. We will see what happens during Zelensky's upcoming March visit to Saudi Arabia, but I think he will be leaning on the government there to try to pressure US into uh, getting Ukraine into the into the direct discussions more and to try to reiterate that point. Um, so we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. We'll see what happens. Let's see what's happening in the Hamas Israel ceasefire deal. A lot of things not so positive, especially with the Biba's family and all those things and a failed terrorist attack in Israel. How should we understand? Things are positive, not positive. Will it begin again?
It's not going great. US has mostly decided to refocus on ousting Hamas from power rather than thinking too much about the details of the displacement slash reconstruction plan for the time being, but even that is proving to be challenging. Um, Many inside Israel do not want the second phase of the ceasefire to take place because that would require withdrawal from Rafah and other strategic areas. So for the time being, it looks like Netanyahu prefers Witkov's suggestion to extend the first phase through the end of Ramadan, which is going to be end of March. Um, and if that happens, then this entire upcoming month will continue the various hostage exchanges with not much difference. What with respect to the failed terrorist attacks, multiple by the way, there's a trail back to Jenin where Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other Iran-backed terrorist organizations have entrenched and expanded their influence so much that they've become a no-go zone even for the Palestinian Authority. So the Israeli forces were conducting a pretty serious security operation there for the first time in years. The last time they went into Jenin, it ended in a bloody mess. It was a huge scandal with a lot of losses, and nobody really wanted to deal with that. But unfortunately, this is the area where Iran has been assisting with smuggling weapons first through Syria until HTS took over, and now through Jordan, where the Jordanian law enforcement has been putting a stop to it. But they've accumulated enough as it is, even with that.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. Let's see what happens there. But one thing that baffles me is Netanyahu's top staffers are under investigation for ties to Qatar during wartime. What's happening there? I thought they have got such a big system; they can keep watch on everyone else. not internally.
No, no. Well, when it comes to top level government corruption, given the fact that they're close to Netanyahu, they felt pretty much protected. And quite frankly, there's been questions about Netanyahu himself. Allegedly, Qatar has tried to issue a $50 million bribe as a campaign contribution a few years ago, and that ended up being frozen by a Jordanian bank and returned to sender. But that doesn't mean that they haven't tried in other ways before, then, or afterwards. So I find it hard to imagine that Netanyahu was completely oblivious that his closest advisors were in some ways benefiting from the relations with Qatar, given his policy of allowing Qatar to provide cash compensation to Hamas without any sort of real oversight about all of that. So I would be surprised if Netanyahu did not know anything what was going on, and for all we know, he may have been part of the scheme in some way himself.
Absolutely. Now let's look at Iran. Iran is readying its military for a possible attack. And why is that? Means it feels that IDF will strike on its nuclear facilities. Is this another extension of the earlier things?
There's been some rumors about that. It's not clear whether that will happen. If Trump is serious about a nuclear deal, he will likely try to stop Israel from doing that, and he will try to exhaust sanctions and diplomatic options before allowing Israel to strike. Meanwhile, Iran has rejected doing a deal with Trump. Perhaps Iran feels that Trump is distracted with Russia, and that Russia, if he makes a grand bargain with Russia, it will benefit Iran, and then it doesn't have to deal with go through the full motion of the deal and so forth. U.S. is targeting Iran's oil tankers through sanctions, which would weaken Iran substantially. And of course, any U.S. energy output would weaken Iran economically as well. But whether or not a strike will happen is questionable. The fact that Iran is actually um, ramping up its uranium enrichment production is also not promising. At one point, they allegedly promised to freeze that production, but that's no longer the case for sure, if it ever
Absolutely.
was. So we could potentially see another direct engagement between Iran and Israel, but what's more likely is US will try to impose more sanctions, but Iran will try to threaten US with a possibility of nuclear production, which will leave. And basically, it's a game of chicken to see whether US will back Israel's um, urgent self-designed attack, or whether Trump will force Israel to concede, in which case Iran knows it has nothing to fear.
Right, Irina. Why do some people get an impression that there is much more posturing between Iran and Israel and actually going to be you know, real problems between these two countries? Earlier on, when this happened, not much damage done, but a lot of missiles fired from both sides. How does it look like from a practical point of view? Is it posturing or is it much more beyond that?
Well, Iran was never particularly strong, and it also did not want to get into a direct fight with Israel, but it did want to send a signal to its proxies, and it did want to test Israel's defenses and to maximize economic damage to Israel by closing off commercial airspace and so forth, and forcing Israel to spend billions of dollars on defense, which it succeeded in doing. Israel felt pressurized by the Biden administration and did not have the weapons it needed at the time to launch a more serious attack. Still, there were critics who believed Israel should have gone further without consulting Biden because the worst damage was already done anyway.
Absolutely. Lots going on everywhere, and we are trying to look for peace. Let's look at Syria. How does it look like? Will it be a new Syrian Constitutional Committee? But it has left the Kurds out of it. How does it look like? What should we understand? What's happening?
We have to understand that this government, whatever you think of it, is largely being backed by Turkey, and Turkey sees the Kurds as an extension of the Turkish PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, but they also opposed to any serious autonomy by the Kurds, but they also don't want them really included in the state building either. They want them weak. And neither here nor there, they want to force a complete dismantlement of any Kurdish military and political corpus. And I think ultimately Turkey is putting the pressure on Syrian government to exclude Kurds from the process, which is um, causing a lot of tensions and confusion. And Kurds are pursuing different efforts. They're trying to engage with the Syrian government directly. They're discussing the possibility of merging their forces with the Syrian army. At the same time, they're trying to advance Kurdish unity with Kurds in Iraq and other places. So we're seeing different things, and they're also trying to use these talks to put pressure the U.S. into not withdrawing from Syria and continuing to cooperate with them against terrorism and potentially serving as deterrence against further Turkish attacks and incursion. But from the looks of it, if the Kurds continue to be excluded, it's not going to be a truly pluralistic government, and likely Turkey and the fundamentalists in the government will only use that as an opportunity to exercise more and more influence over time.
Absolutely, absolutely. We are trying to look for some great news somewhere in the world, but looks like in this episode that doesn't look. Even in Bangladesh, neighboring by Bangladesh, students are launching a new party, even as violence escalates. What's happening in Bangladesh? How do you see it from there?
Quite frankly, there's a cause for concern. It looks like chaos is rising. Islamist parties are proliferating. There's also a lot of infighting between different ex-opposition groups. And we're also seeing a lot of violence against Hindu minorities, and against each other. It looks like a new Arab Spring in Bangladesh at its worst, and the government really is being increasingly taken over by Chinese interests, by Islamist interests, and even those figures who are fairly neutral in the government don't have the power, the authority, or the political will to crack down and put an end to what's going on. We're not seeing any designation of the violent parties and the counterterrorism laws or anything like that, and there is no outside pressure either. U.S. is distracted, not paying attention. Um, India is exercising caution because it's a major security problem for them. So we're not really seeing that sort of pressure that would put an end to this chaos. And the more chaos proliferates, the more outside parties, Hamas, Taliban, Al Qaeda, and so forth, ISIS, are likely to take advantage and establish themselves in Bangladesh.
Absolutely, this world, so many things to make sense of in happening in this world, Irina, and I'm sure you bring a lot of sense to all these things, and I'm sure the next 2 weeks also later on will come to you once again for making sense of it all. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the World According to Irina Shukerman on the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure as always.